Just a reminder that VBS starts on Sunday night, so we won't have a normal Sunday evening service, and we won't have prayer meeting and be in Job next week because we'll be at VBS. Job chapter 20. We're going to tackle the whole chapter. And the best thing about this chapter is that when we get down to verse 29, we don't have to listen to Zophar again. This is the last time he speaks in the book of Job. Let's start with verse 1. Then answered Zophar the Naamathite and said, Therefore do my thoughts cause me to answer, and for this I make haste. I have heard the check of my reproach, and the spirit of my understanding causeth me to answer. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, Where is he? He shall fly away as a dream, and shall not be found. Yea, he shall be chased away as a vision of the night. The eye also, which saw him, shall see him no more, neither shall his place any more behold him. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. His bones are full of the sin of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue, though he spare it and forsake it not, but keep it still within his mouth, yet his meat in his bowels is turned. It is the gall of asps within him. He has swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. God shall cast them out of his belly. He shall suck the poison of asps. The viper's tongue shall slay him. He shall not see the rivers, the floods, the brooks of honey and butter. That which he labored for shall he restore, and shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. Because he hath oppressed and hath forsaken the poor, because he hath violently taken away an house which he builded not. Surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. He shall not save of that which he desired. There shall none of his meat be left. Therefore shall no man look for his goods. In the fullness of his sufficiency he shall be in straits. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. When he is about to fill his belly, God shall cast the fury of his wrath upon him, and shall rain it upon him while he is eating. He shall flee from the iron weapon, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. It is drawn, and cometh out of the body. Yea, the glittering sword cometh out of his gall. Terrors are upon him. All darkness shall be hid in his secret places. A fire not blown shall consume him. It shall go ill with him that is left in his tabernacle. The heaven shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. The increase of his house shall depart, and his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. There is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the heritage appointed unto him by God. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, this evening as we look at Zophar's advice here again to Job, we realize that sometimes well-intentioned advice and sometimes even having some great doctrine can be poorly applied and ill-suited. And we hope that in times of difficulty and trouble we have folks that will come alongside and lift up and encourage and help us through the difficult times instead of beating us with a stick. Thank you for faithful friends. Thank you for the encouragement we find in your word. Thank you for the promises that bolster us through tough times. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. When you look at this, we could spend a lot of time in this chapter, and we're not going to, but we could. Chapter 20 here is actually a masterpiece of poetry in Jewish literature. Uses a lot of figurative language, uses a lot of parallelism, and the structure of it is really incredible. not only the verses themselves, but how they relate back and forth to each other. This is basically a poem on the ghastly fate of the wicked. That's what it is. You'd think, if this were put to a book or a poetry, that Edgar Allan Poe or one of those guys would be the one writing it, because that's very much the way that it comes across. And the basis of what he is saying is good. It's a defense of man's faith in a moral world that's governed by justice. And so basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to defend that justice. But the problem is his basis of justice is wrong. We've talked about that all the way through. And the application is wrong. And so that, again, creates a problem. He starts off here, and you can tell that he is impassioned because he has a very quick response here in the first 3 verses to the rebuke that we left off the end of the last chapter with. He is personally offended by verses 28 and 29, where Job said, hey, y'all better be careful now, because God's going to hold you accountable on the day of judgment as well. And that has not set well with Zophar at all. Based on their own theory of retribution, they are due for judgment, is what Job told them. And that doesn't sit too well, because to their line of thinking, they're the good ones and Job's the bad one. And all the evidence points to that. And so when Job says, hey, I care enough about you guys, you might want to consider that you're going to stand in judgment one day. Boy, that was implying that they had some sin in their lives, and something that they had done or how they were treating him was worthy of judgment. And the interesting thing is, we've looked at discourse after discourse here where they have not pulled any punches, right? I mean, they have hit him with some stuff that really hurts. And Job hasn't gotten personal in that regard. He just simply says, boys, you're going to be accountable someday. Do you not fear standing in the judgment? And Zophar gets mad. I mean, that's what's happening here. A very emotional and very quick response. Therefore do my thoughts cause me to answer, and for this I make haste. I don't have to sit and think about what I'm going to say. What you said disturbed me, it pained me, and here is my reaction. Interesting phrase, check of my reproach. We would say it this way, your shameful rebuke of me. That's what the Hebrew basically says. Zophar gets what Job was saying at the end. He knew that it was stated to them and that it was meant for them to consider it. He got it. He understood that by the way that he responds here. Accusing us of something that God will judge. How dare you? Well, I'm sorry, but there are a lot of people in this world that they can dish out a lot of hate and hurt, but they sure can't take any of it. And that's typical of what we see here from Zophar. His beliefs are offended. So not only is he offended personally, but his beliefs are offended. Job dares to think that God will vindicate him someday, even if it's only at the resurrection of the dead. And what did Bildad say to him for a whole chapter? We are firmly convinced that you are so evil, you're going to spend eternity in hell. So Zophar's reaction is, buddy, I don't know how you think God's going to vindicate you at the resurrection of the dead if you're in hell. That's the quick, angry contrast that we see going on here as he starts. Job had the nerve to tell them to be aware of judgment when everyone knows that God punishes evil and rewards good. And so he's punishing Job, so Job must be evil. He's not punishing them, so they must be good. Not only is it a personal attack, it's an attack on their beliefs. Now, he says his understanding caused him to answer in verse 3. It makes him respond. In other words, this is a really interesting statement from Zophar, because what he's really saying is, Job, shut up and sit down, buddy. The real authority is about to speak. I mean, if we were you hear people talk like that today. Well, you can say. Just because you say it doesn't mean it's true. This is the truth. And they give you their opinion. And because it's their opinion or what they think is true, it has to be the truth. I mean, we're going to get political. We saw this during COVID. In 2 months, there are world experts. And years later, you find out the world experts were wrong about everything. Man, they spoke with authority like God had just given them enlightenment how they were going to save the whole world, and then you find out it was all a farce. This reminds me of Zophar's position here. He's, my understanding causeth me to answer you, and because my answer is completely different than you, you have to understand that my understanding is way better than your understanding. That's how he opens up the rebuke. Now he is going to move into what I would like to call Bildad 2.0. Because that's what it is. He starts off with a little kind of his own thoughts, and then throughout here he very much, and I didn't want to take the time to do it tonight, but he goes back and says almost word for word some stuff that Bildad just got saying, and keeps bringing it back into it like, Job, you should be afraid. Buddy, you're the one that should be worried about judgment. It's broken into 3 little sections, and we're gonna work our way through all 3 of them tonight. Verses 4 through 11. The wicked have always suffered. That is his premise. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon the earth? Job, you should know this. It has always been this way since the world began, and the unanswered ending to that is, and it's always going to be. I mean, that's how he starts out his rebuke. You sit here and say that you think God is going to do this, and God is going to do this, and God is going to do this. But this is how the world has always worked, and this is how the world is always going to work, is verse 4. In verse 5 and 6, he talks about the wicked only benefit for a short time. So last time he spoke, Job answered and said, are you crazy, man? Because everybody can look around and see that the wicked prosper. So now what he's going to do is say, well, it seems like they prosper, but they only prosper for a very short time. So in verses 5 and 6, you had the triumph of the wicked is short, and then he adds, and the joy of the hypocrite, but for a moment. Well, that gives you an idea of what he thinks of Job, right? Because he's taking a shot at Job. So, Job, you are either wicked, or if you're not wicked, God's judging you because you're a hypocrite. You have to fall into one of those 2 categories. And what's interesting in verse 6, it says, though his excellency mount up to the heavens and his head reach unto the clouds. You might have great dignity and you might have great authority for a while. This is a shot at Job, right? Because he was the greatest man in the area where he lived. But look at verse 7. Their life will be short and worthless, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? Interesting way of stating this, because he says, like manure spread on a field. Turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 9 and verse 37. This is, we probably wouldn't talk to people this way, but this is a statement of judgment. You can also read it in Psalm 83:10. But in 2 Kings chapter 9, in verse 37, it says, and the carcass of Jezebel shall be as dung upon the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, this is Jezebel. Okay? You spread manure out on the field. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody wants to be near it. Right? And after a little while, it just breaks down and you don't even, it's gone. You don't walk out there and say, wow, look at all the manure on the field. Or that's the whole point. When pieces of Jezebel are spread out there on the field and the dogs eat her and lick the blood and she's deteriorated, nobody wants to be associated with her, and she's gone from memory. Okay, so that's a similar statement about what they're saying here in Job. Like manure spread on a field, Job, nobody's going to want to be around you, and when you're gone, nobody's going to mourn you, because there's more benefit in your passing than there was in having you present, is kind of the jab that he's taking here, which is rough for somebody to hear when they feel like they're dying pretty soon, but that's neither here nor there. Now, verses 8 and 9, where is he, is the question that is asked at the end of verse 7, which means there's no trace. And then in verse 8, going to use two things that are exciting and seem really real and all wonderful, but there's nothing really to them. And it's a dream and a vision. And if you think about it, even though it seems really real, all of a sudden you wake up and realize it wasn't. That's what he's telling Job. Man, you've got all these goods, and you've got all this dignity, and you've got all this power, and you've got all this, and all of a sudden you wake up the next morning and it was a dream. It's gone. There's no tangible something to hold on to. In verse 10, harsh consequences for those that are left behind. And again, these are direct shots at Job. We can see the parallelism from what happened in chapter 1. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. The return of all the ill-gotten gains to appease those that were cheated makes it difficult on the kids, because all the inheritance is gone. And they do it for one of two reasons, either to prevent revenge or to prevent lawsuits, because somebody comes and says, hey, wait a second, Job cheated me out of such and such, and they take you to court. You have to deal with the court, and then you still have to pay it back. And then verse 11, his bones are full of the sin of his youth, which shall lie down with him in the dust. Sin equals death is basically what Zophar is saying here, which doctrinally sounds good, but the application is rough. And Job obviously is bearing a lot of illness in his body, looks awful, probably smells awful, feels awful. Over and over and over again, he thinks the end is near. Pretty rough shot to take at this poor guy. Then verses 12 through 19, God will certainly punish the wicked. Now, I like the way he starts this off, because it's true. It says, though wickedness be sweet in his mouth, though he hide it under his tongue. In other words, he's saying sin is sweet for a season. Isn't that what Hebrews 11:12 says? It's just the consequences that are awful. And he's going to develop that a little bit more as we go through. But in verses 12 and 13, he says it tastes good and he savors it. That's what it means. He hides it under his tongue. He's not just swallowing it. He's letting it melt in his mouth. He's chewing it to enjoy it. Evil is like a delicious but deadly food. And I was thinking, some people just, for kicks and giggles, eat pufferfish. And pufferfish, if it isn't prepared just right, kills you. I'm like, you're putting an awful lot of faith in the guy cooking up that pufferfish, that all of his cuts were absolutely precise and nothing was for what? For one little meal, to say that you ate something that could kill you and you lived through it? Kind of reminded me of that. But then the other side of the coin is some people cannot resist enjoying what eventually kills them. And there's all kinds of addictions that kill people. And yet your body craves it and it tastes good and you want to enjoy it as long as you can while you have it. That's what Zophar is describing here. In verses 14 through 16, he says, God makes it poison in his system, yet his meat in his bowels is turned. And that word doesn't mean it sours. It means it's fundamentally changed into something else. And he tells us what that is. The gall of asp within him. An asp is a very poisonous snake. And so basically what's happening here is it tasted really good and he's been enjoying it, but a snake bite takes a while to act. Now, some of them are really poisonous, can kill you in a couple of hours, but some of them it takes a little while. And verse 16 we have down, he shall suck the poison of asps. He gladly sucks down his own destruction. That's what Zophar is describing of an evil person, like Job asked for it. And then it makes him sick, back up in verse 15. And he has been enjoying it, and then it turns on him, but he still goes after it, and it makes him sick. He has swallowed down riches, and he shall vomit them up again. God shall cast them out of his belly. The shame and the torment in having to restore them is probably very painful. If you are so bent on stealing things or getting ill-gotten gains and you have to give them back to somebody, I would imagine the very thought of losing whatever it was is probably worse than anything else that could happen to you, as if that's the situation Job was in. We know that's not true. Verse 17, cannot enjoy the simple pleasures of life. The promised land is described as flowing with milk and honey. And he says, he shall not see the rivers, the floods, the brooks of honey and butter. If you had time to take milk and make butter out of it, life is good, right? I mean, if you're buttering your bread and you're eating it with honey, life is really good. But honey and butter are contrasted in the previous verses with the venom and the poison. And so here you are eating this and you're rolling it around in your mouth trying to enjoy it, but it turns into this thing that's going to kill you, when actually what God really wanted to provide for you is something that you would want to roll around in your mouth, and both butter and honey are great for you. Provide a lot of things fundamental to the building blocks of your body. And so you see here the contrast, and what I told you at the beginning, there's some really good stuff in here because Satan is excellent at counterfeiting. When we have a physical need in our body or we want something, God has a legitimate way of supplying it. And then Satan comes along and has the counterfeit. And that's exactly what Zophar is describing here. You don't get to enjoy the milk and the butter because you're over here feeding on Satan's counterfeit, which is actually snake poison. Psalm 36, 8 through 9, Jeremiah 17, verse 6 and verse 8 talk about that. Then in verses 18 and 19, he says, lose what you worked for. This has to be a hard shot to hear, but it also has to be hard for somebody who has been manipulating and conniving, maybe for years, to try and have some scheme come to fruition and then watch the whole thing come tumbling down. You see that he says, that which he labored for shall he restore. So there's no reward for his labor. He works hard to get all this stuff, and then he has to turn around and restore it to somebody else, and he has to sit there and watch them load it in a cart and send it down the road, or somebody else put it in their bank, or whatever it is. But he doesn't get to keep it long. And that's what the phrase means when it says, and shall not swallow it down. He doesn't get to keep it. Dividing up his substance to restore it. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. Go with me, if you will, to Leviticus chapter 6. Because I was sitting here thinking about this, and I thought, well, if he has to give the money back, how is that eating up his substance? I mean, actually, all he's doing is giving back what he took. But that's not true. In Leviticus chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, the law talks about restitution. And it says, then it shall be, because he hath sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore that which he took violently away, or the thing which he hath deceitfully gotten, or that which was delivered him to keep, or lost thing which he found. So all of these different categories of improperly gaining something that doesn't belong to you. Okay, that's what he's describing here. But then look at the action that happens in verse 5. or all that about that which he has sworn falsely, he shall even restore it in the principal. That's the amount that he took. But here's how it eats up his substance, and shall add the fifth part more thereto. Ooh, that's 20%. So you steal $100 from somebody, and they prove that you're guilty, you have to give them back 120. So you thought you were to the good 100, and not only do you lose what you now they're taking some of yours to give to him, kind of like interest. And that's how it's eating up his substance. And so he's conniving and working is the assumption that Zophar is doing here. And what God did, presumably in his judgment, this is Zophar's thinking, God is just taking back the principal and adding the fifth part to all these folks. So the Sabians came in and took their part, and the Chaldeans came in and took their part, and everybody's coming and getting their part, which tells us a little bit more about what they think of Job, because in the last couple of verses they've talked about riches and about ill-gotten gain, and we know that he was a great man and he was very wealthy. So now the assumption is the reason all that is gone is because he got it illegitimately. A tough thing that they keep pouring on him. No pleasure from it, and the reason is simple. It's ill-gotten gains. At least that's what they think. And he uses a couple of words here to describe it. Oppressed. You've forsaken the poor. You've violently taken it away, or it didn't belong to you. It's not yours. And so he uses all of those in the following verses there. And then in verses 20 through 29, he says, the dreadful death of the wicked. And here he starts copying Bildad quite a lot. He's going to borrow from his friend. He starts off, surely he shall not feel quietness in his belly. He shall not save of that which he desired. You're going to get all this stuff in the wrong way, but there's going to be no peace and there's going to be no satisfaction from it. Ecclesiastes 5 verses 13 through 15 talks about this. There's no savings and there's no future peace because you're so worried about how you're getting it and who's going to find out and protecting it that it doesn't really afford you any kind of a life. In verse 21, nothing left, and everyone knows it. There shall none of his meat be left, therefore shall no man look for his goods. This reminds me of the prodigal son's friends, right? He rolls into town and he's a rich man and he's having riotous living and he has all these friends that are around, and as soon as the money runs out, he's in the pig pen. Where are all the friends? There ain't no sense in going down and asking that kid for any money. He don't have enough money to buy himself a meal. He's certainly not going to share it with you. And that's kind of the idea here, that nobody's going to be looking to you for anything because everybody knows you don't have anything. I would say there were no salesmen knocking on Job's door while he's sitting out on the ash heap trying to sell him a refrigerator, right? He can't pay his power bill. I know. We're modernizing it a little. Bear with me. Verse 22, calamity strikes suddenly when you think you're living in prosperity. Obviously another shot, right? From what we know from chapter 1. In the fullness of his sufficiency he shall be in straits. Every hand of the wicked shall come upon him. That's his description of it. Suddenly everybody decided it's time to take the stuff that Job has, and Job, you ask for it. Verse 23, just when he is ready to enjoy it, God sends in the fiery judgment, about to fill his belly. Isn't that when the phone rings and all the computerized voices and stuff start asking you for insurance, or you want to trade in your car, or, you know, all the tele guys want to call you at dinner time because they figure you're going to be home. That's the thing here. You sit down to eat, you have been anticipating it, you're hungry, you're ready to rest, you're ready to get your belly full, and then all of a sudden, life gets a whole lot worse than you ever thought that it could. And then in verses 24 and 25, he says, there's no escape. What's interesting about this is he thinks he's escaped. He thinks he's made it. Look at verse 24. He shall flee from the iron weapon, sword, and the bow of steel shall strike him through. So he has escaped the guy with the sword, and while he's running for his life and he thinks he's made it, the archer nails him with an arrow, and he never even saw it coming. Now, that's the picture of what happens here. Amos chapter 5, verse 19, and Isaiah 24, verse 18. Now he goes on and he's going to describe this, and sometimes when you're looking at the translations of this, they treat this as if it's two completely different verses. But I don't think so. I think it goes together. The bow of steel shall strike him through. A metal-tipped arrow nails him. It is drawn. Well, how do you heal somebody that has been shot with an arrow? First thing you have to do is you got to take the arrow out. It's exactly what it's talking about. And there's two ways you can do that. You either pull it out or you push it through, depending upon what the tip is. So if the tip is like a broadhead, you don't pull it out. You cause a lot more damage. You break off the feathers, and then you have to push it all the rest of the way through. That's what it's being described here in verse 25. It is drawn. In other words, it's taken out of his body. And it cometh out of the body, yea, the glittering sword. Now that is a really interesting Hebrew word, because the glittering word literally means lightning or flash. I believe it's the arrowhead. The arrowhead cometh out of his gall. Where's your gall? From your gall bladder, which is right smack in the middle of your guts, right? And gall has a weird looking color to it. So they push the arrow through, and you're looking down and you see that weird color on the tip of that shiny arrowhead, and you realize somebody shot you in the belly and you are going to die. Because how are you going to patch that up and fix it? And so the end of the statement is, terrors are upon him, because you know you don't have long to live. Boy, isn't that a shot at Job too? Because I'm sure he feels that way, right? He knows that it's a deadly wound. He thought he escaped the sword, chapter 1. He got hit with the arrow, Zophar's probably saying chapter 2, the illness. And now he thinks it is a deadly wound. Verse 26 describes the secret scoffing. All darkness shall be hid in his secret places. A fire not blown shall consume him. It shall go ill with him that is left in his tabernacle. Two different translations. The first one, darkness, all sort of miseries unknown to other people. And so there's a lot of secret stuff going on that you don't know about. So Job, you're looking at these wicked people and you're saying, well, these wicked people seem to thrive for a while. They might seem to thrive for a while, but we don't know all the misery that's going on behind closed doors and secret places, is what Zophar might be saying. He also says the consuming fire of God, not blown on by man. When man builds a fire, he has to sustain it. You have to keep oxygen going to it, or you have to keep fuel going to it. And so the description here is to let Job know that this consuming fire isn't something that man's doing to him. This is something that God's doing to him, because only God can do self-sustaining stuff. Statement that he is making. Terrible posterity to inherit. It shall go ill with him that is left in his tabernacle. And they're assuming that the word tabernacle is used the same way it is earlier in the book of Job, talking about his home. And so those folks that are left in his home are left in dire straits, because when he passes away, he's going to leave an awful testimony and no money and a terrible reputation, right? Most everybody else says that he is echoing Bildad describing hell. And either one of them could be true, because Bildad talked about the darkness and secret places, and we know the fire and the brimstone's not blown upon. And it goes ill with everybody there. Left in your tabernacle could be your body, so you're looking forward to a bodily resurrection when you think God is going to vindicate you, but Zophar's opinion is that bodily you're going to spend eternity in hell suffering. Okay? He is going strong and hard, the opposite of what Job just said in the previous chapter. Then we get down here to the close, and he says, publicly exposed in verses 27 and 28. There's a lot of stuff going on in secret with wicked people that we don't understand. But God has a way of revealing it. Be sure your sin will find you out. The heaven shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. In other words, no one to testify for him, and no one to help him. And then he goes on and he says, the increase of his house shall depart, so he's not going to have anything to show for it, and his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. So when God brings in judgment, there's nothing you can do to stop it. You're going to end up with a big fat donut hole. Not the kind you get in most places. What happens when somebody eats the donut. And then we close here in verse 29. God will judge. This is the portion of a wicked man from God. A wicked man has no right to expect anything else. Now there's a couple of things here, because this is the last thing we hear Zophar say in the book. He's done, thankfully. Bye, Zophar. So glad you're gone. Tired of studying you. But what's interesting is, there is no room here for mercy or repentance. You notice that? All the way down through this chapter, boy, he lays it on. Job, and he always talks, in the third person. The wicked man, the wicked man, the wicked man. But he keeps drawing so many parallels back to things that Job has said, and back to things that we know are true of chapter 1 and 2, and yet there's no room for repentance. There's no room for mercy. This is what's going to happen to you, Job. Boy, tell me how you really feel, Zophar, buddy. It is a sure thing. You, Job, are going to get what is coming to you, and it doesn't matter how much you think God is going to vindicate you. You wait and find out, because God's going to give you exactly what you deserve. The other thing that's really interesting, the loss of wealth is the ultimate punishment here to Zophar. Do you notice that? Over and over and over again, your goods are going to be gone. Buddy, somebody's going to be taking this, and if you leave any inheritance, they're going to have to give it away to pay restitution. Over and over and over again, Zophar keeps talking about how awful it is to lose your wealth. He doesn't talk about being right with God. He doesn't talk about missing a relationship with God like Job does every single time he answers these guys. In Zophar's opinion, the worst thing that could happen to you is to be poor. And Job keeps saying the worst thing that can happen to you is not hear from God. I'm glad it's the last thing Zophar says in the book, because he hadn't had a whole lot. I mean, he has some good doctrine from time to time, but his application and his basis are awful. And this isn't the way you talk to friends. It is no wonder when we get to the end of the book that God is so upset with these three guys, because they have been so proud and haughty in the way that they have dealt with Job, and completely misunderstood the situation, not only with Job, but they have totally misrepresented God, and they've come down hard against him over and over and over again. Job was right, boys. There's coming a day of judgment. You might want to be a little careful here about what you say, how you treat people.